Hey folks, welcome back to Sunken Media. Today for our obscure queer horror, we have a graphic novel that's co-written by a gay author and features a coming out story. I almost didn't cover this one because it's a little bit of a spoiler that this even has a queer storyline in it, but I was so pleasantly surprised. I'd hate for audiences to be sleeping on this, so I'm going to do an otherwise completely spoiler-free review and high recommendation for the serial killer graphic novel Torso on today's obscure queer horror. Originally a 6-part limited comic series, Torso tells the story of the gruesome Torso murders that took place in the 1930s in Cleveland, Ohio, that still to this day are unsolved. Now, the graphic novel is certainly kind of a revisionist, fictionalized story of it, but I was surprised at how well researched and how fact-based it was, kind of up to a point. Now, I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and if you're from Cleveland, you probably know plenty about this case, but just in case you don't, a little bit of background. Dubbed the Torso Killer or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, the Cleveland serial killer was active between at least 1935 and 1938. At least 12 beheaded and dismembered bodies or body parts washed up on the shores of Lake Erie were found around the city. Now, I say at least because there are rumors that he started as early as the 1920s, may have continued as late as the 1950s, and may have been active from Youngstown, Ohio to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all the way out to Los Angeles, California. All of that, though, is really kind of speculation. We still don't know the identity of the Torso Killer. In fact, we don't know the identity of most of his victims, even to this day. Of the 12 victims that were confirmed to be his, only 2 of them were ever identified. There was Edward Andrassy and Florence Polillo. Now, the reason for this is because the butcher, as the press called him, tended to pick people from a part of town that was called Kingsbury Run, that was essentially a shanty town. This was again during the Great Depression, and people were not doing well. Cleveland was known as the comeback city, so a lot of people were coming in trying to find opportunities and then ending up in these small sort of shanties or shacks that were made out of various kind of garbage and debris that could kind of be scrounged up. As a result, these people might have been new to Cleveland or may not have had, a regular routine where someone would miss them and report them missing. And again, even now, it is almost exactly 90 years since the first bodies were found. We still don't know 10 of his 12 victims' identities. Now, during the killer's spree, legendary Untouchables lawman Eliot Ness was actually brought into the city and served as the safety director. Now, Ness was kind of famous for having brought down Al Capone, and he was one of that Untouchables crew.
Kevin Costner is Eliot Ness.
And it is right around the time of his hiring that the graphic novel begins. He spearheaded certain initiatives and was supposedly on the forefront of that investigation. Obviously, Torso was the biggest thing happening in town, and the graphic novel really looks at this particular era as he's trying to catch this madman who is actively taunting him with postcards, and he's desperately trying to clean this all up before the 1936 Republican National Convention, which did in fact take place right in the middle of the killings. Now, in addition to following Ness, there are actually 2 kind of main characters who are our main investigators in the story. Now, this is kind of where some of the fictionalization starts. There were 2 lead detectives, Peter Merylo and Martin Zalewski. In the graphic novel, Detective Walter Merlo, I think, probably stands in for Merylo, and he's paired up with an entirely fictional detective named Sam Simon. And after Eliot Ness has come into town, he's kind of cleaned the departments of all the corrupt cops, and these are 2 of the last clean, good guys left standing. Now, impressed with the detectives, Ness recruits them to quickly and quietly solve that series of gory slayings. Now, again, the story has a great sort of coming out arc, which is not historically accurate. A lot of things in the 3rd act, obviously, are not historically accurate. It spins off into fiction, very much like an Inglourious Bastards, where it's revisionist, but it's for the sake of the story. It was nice as a 90s comic reader to see a main character come out, and especially in kind of a detective noir, not a genre that usually deals with a lot of queer themes. At least in a positive sense. So the graphic novel, again, was published over the course of 6 issues between October 98 and September 1999. The book is co-written by Cleveland native Brian Michael Bendis, as well as his co-writer, the openly gay Marc Andreyko. The comic was actually conceived by Bendis after he was working for Cleveland's Plain Dealer newspaper, and his editor gave him access to all of the torso files. And you can really kind of see it throughout the comic. He makes great use of newspaper articles, archival clippings, actual police photographs, crime scene photos. He uses them as backgrounds in a lot of the panels of the graphic novel, and it just adds this element of authenticity to the whole thing. And it really kind of beautifully matches these archival and these sort of fact-based things with artwork that has a very film noir aesthetic. Now, I read that Andreyko originally envisioned it as a screenplay, but Bendis really believed in it as a graphic novel / comic kind of concept, and you can really see both influences here. The artwork kind of uses both media to kind of mirror each other. They use repeating comic panels to mimic cameras coming into focus. And then the drawing style uses a lot of strong contrasts and shadows and murkiness to kind of mirror film noir lighting that was really popular during that 1930s era. And in general, there is a lot of play with light and dark within this, and a lot of times it's kind of turned on its head. Our heroes are often cast in shadow, and sometimes you're not even sure who's talking in some of these scenes. Meanwhile, there are some very antagonistic characters that are kind of in this gleaming, blinding light. And I think that's just kind of a nod to the idea that you don't know who you can trust. You're not sure who's corrupt in this city. You're not sure who the killer is. It's funny to sort of talk about lighting within a comic book or a graphic novel, but it was a really successful use of what I would call lighting, and kind of a really good example of how cinematic this particular graphic novel is. And then in terms of the kind of more traditional graphic novel elements that they use so successfully, there is a lot of negative space and blackness around the edges, and then there are pages where the dialogue kind of like circles in on itself or goes sideways or jumps around all over the page. It illustrates this sort of frantic and confusing and disorienting state that these police officers are in as they're trying to figure out who's behind all of this. There are a lot of unknowns and a lot of mystery, and the detectives are just kind of slowly figuring things out. With a killer that kind of never does come to light, it makes sense that there would be a lot of blackness, a lot of darkness, a lot of things that they're just never going to figure out. And the dialogue includes like just the right amount of 1930s kind of hard-boiled detective slang without getting too precious or getting in the way.
You just get out of here on a high, see?
And there are some great little nods to Cleveland culture and its landmarks.
Garfield 1, 2, 3, 2, 3.
And as I said, as the story goes on, it kind of deviates a little bit more and more from the facts, and that third act is entirely fictional. But again, it's a great story. It's a great kind of introduction to the torso killings. Obviously, if you're interested, do research beyond this. Go find kind of the facts, if you will. If you're into true crime, if you're into film noir, if you're into serial killers at all, definitely Torso is one I highly recommend, and a great little surprise queer read that I was not expecting when I picked this up. So while we're kind of on the subject of true crime graphic novels, I cannot highly enough recommend the work of Rick Geary. He has a couple different collections. One is a treasury of Victorian murder, and the other is a treasury of 20th century murder. And his stuff is really impeccably researched. He kind of recreates blueprints of houses and crime scenes and timelines, and it's entirely factual. Definitely check out the works of Rick Geary. And a little tip to anyone who loves graphic novels in general, there is a website called Hoopla. It is free through most of your libraries. As long as you have a library card, they have a huge collection of comic books and graphic novels. Both Torso and the works of Rick Geary are on there if you're interested. This isn't a promo. I love libraries and I love getting stuff for free, and why not pass that along? Check with your local library, see if they've got Hoopla. It could open up a whole new collection of comics for you. All right, well, that should do it for this edition. Let me know if there's other obscure queer horrors I may not have heard of. Let's get those out there to the people. Like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Much love to you all. And I will see you all on the next Sunken Media.